Hi, my name is Tony McLaughlin. I'm talking payments with Bianca Lopes from Talle. Hi, Bianca. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm,
It's
I'm
nice to
great.
be here.
Hey, Bianca, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
All right. Well, I am Brazilian. I'm actually speaking to you from Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. Even though I've spent my entire career outside, I have become an identity geek ass sort of backwards by total accident, where I started my career as a banker. I
Mhm.
worked at RBC, and then I moved on to doing my master's in mathematics and my PhD in data, and fell in love with biometrics and identity, and have sort of been there ever since. About a year ago, I got together with my co-founder, Beatrice, and we decided that it was time for us to cut the jargon in technology and finance and build a company to make everybody pause. In hindsight, the tail symbol is the pause. I didn't mean it quite literally for a world pandemic to break out, but we've been working with financial institutions across the globe to help them articulate stories from people, technology to transformation and change.
And one of your core interests is in digital identity infrastructure. I mean, I don't know anyone who travels as much as you. When people travel,
Not anymore.
yeah, exactly, massive change in lifestyle for you. But when most people travel, they check out the bar or the beach. You check out the digital infrastructure. That's your main interest when you get to a new place, right?
Yes, it's been my main entrance from China to India to the UK to Denmark to Estonia to Brazil. I've been fortunate enough to be looking at the digital identity infrastructure. So, what is it? What does it look like? Do we have a digital identity that's governed by the government? Is it outsourced by the banks as a consortium? Do we have something that is centralized, decentralized? That's been my common
Yeah.
geek touristic interest. I should probably write a Lonely Planet digital identity version at some point.
Well, you already have produced a great series of videos that people can check out on YouTube, which gives you observations from different countries. And you've seen every different type of model, like as you said, the centralized model in India with Aadhaar, the more federated models in places like Belgium with It's Me. So, what, in your view, and it's going to be hard to summarize this, but what's best practice? What does good look like when it comes to digital identity infrastructure?
That's a tough question. I think I think there's three sort of pillar that are foundational for looking and evaluating what good really looks like. I think the first one is always, does this belong to the government versus does this belong to the private sector? So if we start there, I think there is a history element and an anthropological element that plays a role into what is the relationship of the people with the government. Is
Yeah.
it a monarchy since the 1600s like Denmark, that there is an inherent trust with the government, and MID has been there. Now it's on its second iteration, but it's been there for way longer than another country like Estonia, which is recent and oftenly talked about when it comes to identity because
Yeah.
they did a blockchain driven solution
Yeah.
and then build bespoke products that you can do anything from voting to accessing government services. I think there is an undeniable role that the government has to play when it comes to identity, but I would probably tend to go towards a more collaborative way, and lately have been thinking much more about the individual. So I think that there is a line in the sand. So when I look at the pillar of economical trust and history, I also look at the pillar of the literacy and understanding that a consumer has when it comes to their identity. I think most of us don't, outside of this little club that's probably watching this, don't think about identity on a day-to-day basis. We see it as an attribute that is given to us.
Hmm.
That is an ID from the government, an ID from
Credential.
the bank, right?
Yeah.
And I've been sort of becoming a bit more obsessed with, not from an activist perspective, but the concept behind a self-sovereign identity where I really am me. And I happen to have a Canadian citizenship. I happen to have a Brazilian citizenship, but those two things don't define me. They're just attributes that in a particular circumstance allow me access. So I think that the models that I've seen are the collaborative models, are the models that are starting to look at interoperability, because in the end of the day, I think COVID-19 has only brought this further up to attention. People ask me, well, COVID-19 has brought a problem onto identity. I was like, no, no, no. The problem has been there for years. None of you have listened to me or people that talk about this. And now it's just become ridiculously obvious
Yeah.
that the infrastructure is wrong. So I think there is there's no right and wrong here. I think there's some obvious mistakes that have been made, whether you can talk about a DAR and about cryptography or about the dependency on social engineering and humans. When you don't really think of the structure from the beginning to the end, it's often where I see point solutions, and point solutions are not going to solve anything.
So this is an interesting point is I guess from COVID, lots of commentators are saying that society will be more digital. And then that gets me thinking about what kind of infrastructure will we need to have a broader engagement with society with digital. And you talked about different models of identity. One is given by the government, another perhaps like a federated scheme with a group of companies who also give you credentials. And then I guess at the other end of the spectrum is self-sovereign, where I kind of control the identity credential myself and assemble it from my relationships with different entities. So am I hearing you say that you're becoming more fascinated with the self-sovereign end of the spectrum?
I perhaps am from a perspective where I think where digital identity, I think it's not where the attributes, I don't agree so much that people have the cadence or the trustworthiness to provide their attributes. And I think the proof is already evident. If you look at how many digital identities we create of ourselves, how many, like even just like a simple thing I often say is like your photo on LinkedIn is likely different than your photo on Facebook and WhatsApp. Does that mean you're trying to portray two different people? No, that means that you have an inherited understanding that identity is access, and I want to be perceived as professional and I want to be perceived as fun, perhaps, on the other one. So I think you can't rely on people identifying themselves for everything, because I think you'll see, and I come from a country where fraud is creative and very effective. The Brazilians use their creativity for wrong sometimes. I think I'm more interested in self-sovereign identity models when it comes to data monetization, when it comes to people understanding the belongingness of their data, that the ownership of their data, that I firmly believe in. My data is mine, and nobody should have access to it. And until you have an infrastructure similarly to a self-sovereign identity model, people will never care, because they'll never have a way of monetizing or actually actively controlling it and having an understanding of what is the financial trade-off or the privacy trade-off. And if we go back to the beginning of your comment about COVID being a catalyst, I think certainly is. Like, we've all seen the memes about like the best innovation officer is COVID-19, right? Not the chief innovation officer, not the CTO. I think it's the pressure that has made us all realize that we need to both exist in an analog and in a digital world, and that our systems were just digitized, not born native digital.
Absolutely. Well, I guess necessity is the mother of invention, and it's going to change the way we live and what fintechs focus on. It's going to change what you focus on as a new company as well. I mean, you've traditionally been on the road for 200 days a year, talking to your clients face to face. This is certainly going to change the way in which you interact with your clients, right? How are you finding that switch?
It's been challenging. Like, I'm going to be real and have empathy towards other people that have gone through this challenge. I think most people know that I have a speaking career. Obviously, that has totally switched to webinars and digital, but it's not the same. So I think just the adjustment of that alone is challenging. I'm a people's person. Like, if you've met me in person, I'm very warm and I like giving hugs, and I can't do any of those things. So that's been a little bit challenging. But I think there's opportunities. I think that there's been time for, I'm in Brazil actively talking to large banks and telecommunication companies about their turn to digital. I think one thing that COVID-19 has done is allowed us to have a voice in the room a little bit louder, because perhaps it could have been postponed before. And now they're starting to see the vulnerabilities. Like, if I give you some stats on Brazil as an example, there is over 70% of an increase on e-commerce. If you look at the first 15 days of March, comparable.
Yeah.
And there's a 350% increase in that same number of fraud.
Yeah.
So people have realized that they had bought point solutions and had thought of a cell phone as just another channel instead of an integrated product strategy, which means identity from beginning to the end, cryptography from the beginning to the end, a really deep understanding of what data you're collecting when. So I think we're starting to have a bigger voice in the room. So that I'm enjoying from the change.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about that because banks, in terms of their role in identity infrastructures, in some countries they've figured it out, right? In Sweden and in Norway and Denmark, the banks play a role in a federated ID scheme. In many other places, banks, who after all have to know us from a regulatory perspective, don't play a massive role in identity. They don't participate in federated schemes. They don't seem to prioritize it from a business perspective. So you're working with lots of bank clients. Will COVID be the catalyst, as you mentioned, for banks to get together and work on federated ID schemes? And do you think that would be a good thing for banks to do?
I think we wrote an article, a report about our federated bank ID that we can put in plug here for people to read that has lots of our collective opinions. But I believe in the collaborative space. I unfortunately am seeing still them just really worried about how they provide their services and products online. The focus right now, it's very immediate of I need to get, I don't have branches anymore. I need to get service. How do I do that? How do I do remote onboarding? There's been a massive focus on that, where my expertise in biometrics has played a significant strategic role and one that I'm thankful for. And the technology is finally there when you sort of look at all the factors between camera quality of a phone that 3 years ago wasn't the same, and the speed in which we change phones, and obviously 4 to 5G infrastructure that people have been investing in. So there's like lots of factors that are contributing for the banks to have to do it and actually be able technologically to do it. I have not seen schemes of conversations, at least as an example in South America, of banks coming together.
No.
I think the financial services industry is still very reluctant, wrongfully in my opinion, on thinking that they own their customer, even though open banking is coming to effect in Brazil and in November is already in effect in London and Australia. I think there's still this understanding of, I fundamentally think they lost their grip on maybe where they provide value. And I think we've seen that with, well, Bo being subtracted from the market and things like that, what banks thought it just has to be digital. And if it's digital, good enough and customers will stick to it. And it's like, actually, no.
And I want to ask you kind of like a broader question, which is about this apparent move to digital. Do you think like a digital world will be a more equal world or a more unequal world?
It's hard not to be heavy way down with the sentiment of everything that's happening in obviously the US, that I think only brings attention to how unequal the world is at a fundamental level. And I think COVID has only made me realize that with things that just don't sit well with me, in terms of welfare quality and basic access to education or health for that matter, that I think become apparent with a health crisis. I think the digital world has, on a hopeful that I am and like never ending optimist, like has an opportunity to do this. I think one of the reasons why I fell in love with identity is the opportunity of inclusion. When I look at how many people worldwide don't have identification, and that just means that they're not digitally or physically able to do anything.
You can't transact.
They can't do anything, right? Now we have things like an ubiquitous device like a cell phone that can be used, that has a camera, that can be used to register hundreds of people, thousands of people through biometric enrollments, or using sort of all the richness of the information and contextual data that a phone could have. So I think we have an opportunity and frankly, an obligation of creating this digital, not another barrier for society and for perhaps less fortunate, but actually an opportunity for people to be included.
Great. So Bianca, my final question is, we're living in this strange time. I mean, I describe it sometimes as enforced mindfulness, but call it what you will, it's a strange time.
I love the name.
We're all living a slightly different lifestyle, but assuming we get back to normal, whatever that looks like, what will you carry from your lockdown experience back into your normal life?
I think, as I joked about the pause symbol of Talle and this need to pause to actually understand how complex the world is, I think that is something I've been practicing. I'm a fan of yoga for many years now, and I have to admit that I've been pretty diligent because otherwise I think I'd go a little bit. So I think that practice has stayed. And at Talle, we installed something that's called a rose, a bud, and a thorn. And every week I get together with my team and we sort of talk about something that has bloomed like a rose, something that is a bud, and something that's a thorn that week. Yeah. And I think that practice, I've been even incorporating that practice into mindset conversations about, let's look at an innovation agenda and let's look at what has bloomed and what is not going well and hurting and what maybe is in the horizon, and explore that through the lenses of understanding that there's shades. There's some good in this pandemic that hopefully will come with everybody.
Yeah. Wow.
So I'm trying to, the mindfulness is definitely something that resonates with me, and I think something everybody should invest in. It's an opportunity for you to know yourself a lot better.
Those are great takeaways. I just want to thank you for spending time with us. You're a great interviewer as well, so people can find your content on YouTube, and look forward to speaking to you again soon, Bianca. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be on the other side. Thank you, Tony.
On you. Bye.
Bye.